All right. So you said in this article on the Georgian elections,
Mm-hmm.
and wow, wow.
Yeah.
This is a lot to unpack here.
Definitely a lot going on.
I mean, it's not just like you know who's going to win.
Right.
It's like the future of this entire country is at stake.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's set the scene right. We're talking Georgia, which is in the Caucasus region,
Mm-hmm.
and they held their parliamentary elections just the other day on October 26th.
Right. Very recently.
And the results have caused, well, let's just say they've caused some problems.
Yeah, it definitely sparked some major controversy, you could say.
Definitely some controversy.
A lot of tension.
Okay, so the article, it gives us the initial results and, well, the ruling party, Georgian Dream, they're saying they won.
Mm-hmm.
They claim to have gotten 54.8% of the vote.
Sounds like a pretty decisive victory at first glance, right?
Yeah, it does. But I feel like, there's got to be more to it.
Oh, there's definitely a lot more going on beneath the surface.
I think so.
We can't just look at those numbers without thinking about, well, what's Georgian Dream actually been doing?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
They've been in power for a while now.
Since 2012, right.
Right, since 2012. And initially, they were all about democratic reforms. That was like their big thing.
Yeah.
But then things started shifting.
Yeah, it seems like they've gotten more, I don't know.
More authoritarian.
Yeah, authoritarian.
Yeah, and that's really worrying, especially when you look at, well, what's been happening in Russia, their neighbor.
It's like they're kind of following the same playbook.
Yeah, it's a disturbing trend for sure.
And that's what I thought was so crazy about this whole thing. The article, it mentions that they've been passing these laws that limit free speech.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this one law in particular that really worried Europe.
Oh, are you talking about that foreign influence law?
Yeah, the foreign influence law.
That one from June 2024? Yeah, that caused a huge stir.
So what's the deal with this law?
Well, I mean, on paper, it sounds kind of reasonable. It's about keeping foreign organizations from, I don't know, meddling too much.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people see it as, well, as a way to silence critics.
Ah, so it's like they're saying it's for one thing, but really using it for something else?
Exactly. It's like a way to control what people are saying, kind of like, well, like what we've seen in Russia, unfortunately.
No, that makes sense.
And the EU, they weren't happy about it at all.
Really?
Yeah, they actually suspended Georgia's EU membership process because of this law.
Wow.
It was a pretty big deal.
So it sounds like this election, it was already happening in a really tense atmosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
Like people were already worried about Georgia becoming less democratic.
Yeah, and then this foreign influence law,
Yeah.
it just added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, definitely a red flag.
A big one.
So a lot of Georgians were hoping this election would be a chance to, show their support for Europe.
Yeah, to kind of reaffirm their commitment to democracy and those European values.
Yeah.
So the results, well, let's just say they added even more drama to the whole situation.
Definitely added more drama.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about the biggest bombshell in this whole story. President Salome Zurabichvili, she's refusing to accept the election results.
Oh, yeah, she's not holding back at all.
She's not. She's calling for public protests and saying the election was rigged.
Straight up calling for action.
Yeah, that's not exactly a typical response.
No, not at all. It's a very bold move.
Yeah.
She's really putting herself out there.
So what's her reasoning? Why is she so against these results?
Well, she's claiming it was all manipulated, like it wasn't a fair election at all.
And she thinks Russia's involved.
Exactly. She's calling it a Russian special operation.
Wow, special operation. Those are some serious words.
Yeah, very strong language.
And she's basically comparing it to, like, Russia holding their own elections inside Georgia.
Which is a pretty powerful image.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, she's basically saying that Russia is trying to control Georgia's future.
It's a serious accusation to make.
Absolutely. It's a huge deal.
But what evidence does she have? I mean, is there anything to back up these claims?
Well, the article mentions these European election observers. They were there, watching the whole process.
Right, to make sure things were fair.
Exactly. And they reported some pretty disturbing stuff.
Like what?
Well, they said the whole atmosphere was really divisive. Like, people were being intimidated. There were attempts to buy votes, double voting, even some violence.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a free and fair election at all.
No, not at all.
And the observers, they specifically called out the ruling party, Georgian Dream.
Okay.
They criticized their rhetoric, calling it anti-Western and hostile.
That's interesting.
And they also said that Georgian Dream was pushing Russian misinformation.
Ah, so there's that Russia connection again.
Exactly.
So it sounds like even though Georgian Dream says they want to be closer to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
their actions and Well, even what their own president is saying suggests something different.
Right. It's like there's this disconnect between what they're saying and what they're actually doing.
Yeah, big contradiction.
And that's what's making people so suspicious about these election results.
It makes sense. It's like, who are you really? What are you really after?
Exactly. It raises a lot of questions about their true intentions.
Okay, there's this part in the article that really stood out to me, too.
Okay, what is it?
So it talks about this region in southern Georgia, Javakheti,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the people who live there are ethnic Armenians.
Right, right.
And they reported almost 90% support for Georgian Dream.
Wow, that's a huge number.
Yeah, and it's a huge difference from what we're seeing in the capital, Tbilisi.
Yeah, that's a pretty stark contrast.
So what's the deal with that? What does it mean?
Well, that kind of regional disparity definitely raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the article mentions that some AP journalists, they visited Javakheti before the election.
Yeah.
And they found some evidence that local officials were basically telling people how to vote.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, and some residents, they were even saying they supported Russia, questioning why Georgia even needs to be closer to Europe.
That's so different from what we've been talking about with Tbilisi and the president.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if there's something else going on in that region.
Like maybe some pressure or influence from Russia.
It's definitely possible, but it would take more investigation to know for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's definitely a red flag, though, that's for sure.
It definitely is a red flag.
Yeah, it makes you think maybe there's this divide, right?
Mhm.
Like you've got the cities like Tbilisi,
Right.
they seem to be leaning towards Europe,
Yeah.
but then you have these more rural areas.
Like Javakheti.
Yeah, exactly. And they might be more open to, well, Russian influence or pressure even.
It's kind of a scary thought, isn't it?
It definitely is, especially when you consider all the other stuff going on.
So we've got President Zurabishvili. She's saying there was interference. The observers are saying things weren't fair.
Right.
But is there anything else in this article, anything that really points to Russia actually trying to, mess with the election?
Well, remember how the president called it a Russian special operation?
Yeah, I do.
Well, the article brings up those European observers again, and they specifically mentioned Russian misinformation being spread around
Interesting.
and manipulations and conspiracy theories.
Oh, wow.
They said all of that was creating a really tense and divisive atmosphere.
So it's like they're not saying directly that Russia did it, but
But they're definitely pointing in that direction.
yeah, I get it.
It's like they're saying, hey, look over there. Notice anything suspicious?
Exactly. It's all starting to feel like a spy movie or something.
Right. It's crazy.
So we've got these accusations of, people being told how to vote and this whole idea of Russia lurking in the background, pulling strings.
Yeah, it's a pretty unsettling picture.
It's really worrying, especially when you think about Georgia's future.
Mm-hmm.
Like they want to be part of Europe.
Right. That's their goal.
But if Russia really is meddling, well, that could really mess things up.
Oh, absolutely. It could be devastating for their relationship with the EU.
And it might make joining the EU almost impossible.
Yeah, the EU is really serious about, countries being democratic and free from outside interference.
I wonder how the EU is going to react to all of this.
That's a good question. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
What about President Zurabishvili? She's really taking a stand here.
Oh, yeah. She's not backing down.
It's a risky move, right? I mean, she's challenging the results, calling for protests.
It definitely is. It's a big gamble.
What do you think will happen?
Well, it could go a couple of ways, right?
Yep.
Maybe this will energize the opposition. Maybe more people will join the protests.
And that could force Georgian Dream to make some changes.
Exactly. But on the other hand, it could backfire.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. What if the protests don't go anywhere?
Or what if they lead to even more instability?
Yeah, that's a worry.
It's a really delicate situation.
Okay, there's this one detail in the article that I found really interesting.
Okay, what is it?
So it mentions Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary.
Yeah, you know who you mean.
Well, he was the first world leader to congratulate Georgian Dream.
Huh, that is interesting.
Even though there's all this controversy, he's already saying congrats.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant endorsement, especially coming from him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Orban is kind of a controversial figure himself, right?
He definitely is.
I mean, he's had his own issues with the EU over, democracy and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, he's been criticized a lot for his style of leadership.
So it's weird, right? Why would he be so quick to support Georgian Dream, knowing all the problems with the election?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what his motivations are and what kind of influence he might have.
Especially since the article mentions that he's planning to visit Georgia soon.
Oh, really? That adds another layer to this whole thing.
Right. What do you think that visit means?
Well, it could be a few things, right? Maybe it's just a show of support for Georgian Dream, like he's saying, hey, I'm with you, I don't care what the others say. But maybe it's something else. Maybe he's trying to play peacemaker.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe he wants to try and calm things down, de-escalate the situation.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens during that visit.
Definitely. It's something to keep an eye on, for sure.
So as we're going through all this, what's sticking out to you the most? What's really grabbing your attention?
For me, it's this whole idea of how everything is connected.
What do you mean?
Like, you've got Georgia's internal politics, their own struggles with democracy.
Right.
But then you've also got these huge geopolitical forces at play, like Russia and the West.
Yeah, like Georgia's caught in the middle.
Exactly. And the stakes are incredibly high, not just for Georgia, but for the whole region.
It's crazy to think that an election in one country could have such a big impact on the world.
Yeah, it really shows how interconnected everything is.
So this isn't just about who's in charge in Georgia.
Right.
It's about democracy itself and the balance of power in a really important part of the world.
It's about the future. What kind of world do we want to live in?
That's deep.
Well, it's true. This whole situation in Georgia, it's a microcosm of the bigger struggles happening globally.
So what can we learn from this? What can we take away from all of this?
I think it's a reminder that democracy is fragile. It's something you have to constantly fight for.
Yeah, it's not something you can just take for granted.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to have, independent media and observers.
To keep things honest, to hold people accountable.
Exactly. Because when those things are missing, that's when you see things like this happening, with potential manipulation and interference.
So,
Yeah.
as we're trying to process all of this, what questions are coming up for you? What do you want to know more about?
Honestly, the biggest thing for me is this feeling of uncertainty. Like, will Georgia be able to decide its own future?
That's the big question, isn't it? Or will they just become a pawn in this bigger game between Russia and the West?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's really hard to say what will happen next.
There are so many different ways this could go.
Exactly, and so many factors at play.
Will the protests actually make a difference?
Well, that depends. Will they keep growing? Will they stay peaceful? Or will things escalate?
Yeah, if they turn violent, that could really backfire.
It could. It could give the government an excuse to crack down even harder.
And then what about Georgian Dream? Will they actually listen to the people?
That's another big unknown. Will they be willing to compromise? Or will they just dig in their heels?
It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, on one hand, they've got these protests and the president speaking out against them.
Right, and on the other hand, they've got Russia looming in the background.
Exactly, and we still don't know how far Russia is willing to go.
Will they just sit back and watch? Or will they try to take advantage of the chaos?
That's a scary thought, isn't it?
It is. I mean, Russia has a history of meddling in their neighbors' affairs.
Oh, yeah, especially when those neighbors start getting too cozy with the West.
So they could try to put pressure on Georgia, maybe economically or even militarily?
It's possible, and that could destabilize the entire region.
It's like one wrong move could set off a whole chain reaction.
And the consequences could be disastrous.
So it all comes down to, well, the people of Georgia and the international community.
Will they stand up for democracy? Will they hold those responsible accountable?
What about the EU and the U.S.? What role will they play?
Well, they could impose sanctions or offer diplomatic support to Georgia.
But will that be enough?
It's hard to say, but doing nothing would send a really bad message.
Like, we're just going to let Russia do whatever they want.
Exactly. It would be a sign that democracy is losing ground.
This whole situation, it's just so fragile, it feels like anything could happen.
And that's why it's important to pay attention, to stay informed.
Yeah, we can't just ignore what's happening in other parts of the world.
Because what happens in Georgia, it affects all of us in one way or another.
So what can we do? Is there anything we can do to help?
Well, for starters, we can spread awareness, talk to our friends and family, share what we've learned.
Yeah, get the word out there.
We can also contact our elected officials, tell them we care about what's happening in Georgia.
And that we want them to take action.
Exactly. And there are organizations that are working to support democracy and human rights in the region. We can donate to them, volunteer our time.
Even small actions can make a difference.
They can. Every little bit helps.
This whole deep dive has been a real wake-up call for me.
It's eye-opening, isn't it?
It shows that democracy is something you have to constantly fight for.
And that we can't take it for granted, not for a second.
Well, this has been an intense conversation, but a really important one.
I agree. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
So to our listener, we've taken a deep dive into the Georgian election controversy. And, well, it's clear that the future of Georgia is hanging in the balance.
Hmm.
Will they be able to overcome these challenges? Will they be able to choose their own path?
We can only hope.
We can only hope that the people of Georgia and the international community will stand up for democracy and justice.
And that the forces of freedom will prevail.
It's a fight worth fighting.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop fighting for what you believe in